All right, let's go ahead and get started. Dee, thanks for putting this all together. One quick note across our team is when I'm presenting, I can't see the chat or the questions, so you'll have to interrupt me and ask questions that are relevant during the process, Dee. I don't know if it's something
Yep.
that a setting that I've
Yep.
got, but I can't see any of them at the moment. All right, so goal of today's webinar. We are going to talk to our own team about how we work smarter by using AWS or Amazon Web Services. So this is going to be relatively entry level for those out there. Hopefully there are some technical folks who are looking just to see what it's like or how we use it and how we manage a number of both builds and production environment websites and applications on AWS. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Our agenda today, our goal is to for sure be done in 42 minutes from now for a total of 45 minutes. What we're going to do is introductions to panelists, high-level overview of AWS for those that are new, how Fjorge uses Amazon Web Services, and then features, trends, the future, and of course, Q&A. We really hope to get some great questions from all of you out there today. If you have them, please place them in the Q&A. There's also a chat if you don't see a Q&A button. And we'll monitor both of those feeds. We will answer them in line during the presentation if it makes sense. Otherwise, we will reserve some time at the end. So please, I challenge you to think of some questions that we can answer. Starting, first slide is me. I am Joe Barsness. I am Director of Business Development at Fjorge. So my goal or my role today is to be your host and ask Tim and Ben, those who know quite a bit about AWS on our team. And frankly, I came up with this idea because I'm as curious as many of you. I have a small little piece of knowledge from 3 or 4 years ago of logging into the AWS panel. But from then, all I hear is about all the great work that Ben and Tim do. So I have this curiosity, and I thought maybe it'd be great to share with some of our partners and folks that we work with. Tim, would you mind just doing a brief intro and then kind of your experience with AWS thus far?
Yeah, I'm Tim Barsness. I'm the founder of Fjorge. I have been using AWS for quite a while. I can't say exactly how long, but essentially we, at one point, Fjorge decided to move all our servers to AWS. And since that point, it was 5+ years ago, we've been operating and watching as the platform and the service have grown, as well as our company has grown.
All right, Ben.
Ben Johnson. I'm the system administrator. I can't talk. Sorry, stage fright. Systems administrator at Fjorge. I primarily work with the managed services team. We use AWS to host all of our websites, and we also use a variety of tools that AWS provides to facilitate those websites and basically make them run smoother.
Awesome. And for those of you who didn't pick up on it, between the two slides, Tim and I are brothers, and I am older. That's all you need to know about that. Let's talk a little bit about AWS benefits at a glance. So some of this is right from their language, but let's talk about and Ben, I know you work in other hosting and management platforms as well. Let's talk a little bit about easy to use. What makes AWS like your go-to for all of the different technologies that we work with?
Yeah, so AWS, traditionally, when you need to host a website, back in the olden days, you could say, you would have to reserve space at a data center, and you would have to buy servers, and you'd have to do all the networking, get everything set up. the ease of use of AWS is the fact that you can just give them your credit card info and you can spin up a server in a matter of seconds. It's super easy to get started. It's super customizable on like all the settings that you choose when starting up a server. And yeah, so I mean, it's the benefits of like getting up and running are insane, I would have to say.
Got it. And how do you feel it in terms of flexibility? What I think of this, you maybe have a different definition, is that we host and maintain small WordPress websites, large other CMSs, Sitecore, and .NET technologies. Like, what makes it our go-to no matter what technology we're working with?
Yeah, so it's super flexible in terms of platform. When you create a server, you can choose whatever operating system you want. As of like, well, kind of a sidetrack, but as of recently, you could actually even spin up like Mac servers, which is brand new. And with the ability to spin up any platform you want, of course, that gives you the tools to host any kind of website that you need to host. Also, there's a lot of flexibility in kind of what I mentioned earlier, but aside from platform, but just like the sizing and the traffic. You can host a website like for your own personal use that would cost essentially nothing. You could host a static site, you can host WordPress sites, or you could host a massive application that reaches millions of people every day. So yeah, I mean, it's extremely flexible in every aspect, I would say.
Got it. And how do we make it cost effective? I know the example is that when we're doing kind of more of a full service management of a property that we built or inherited, we include the hosting fees with them a lot of times, other than large, high traffic websites. What makes it cost effective to kind of make that almost an afterthought and more the management, the focus of the expense?
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools that AWS provides that allow you to cut down on costs. Even the fact that you don't have to just buy a server and pay that upfront cost of purchasing the server hardware and moving it to a rack somewhere. So like that side of things allows a lot. Sorry, sorry, totally getting sidetracked. Let me restart.
Ben, I agree with what you're saying there. I think from my perspective, the most important things are, like you're alluding to, it's not very capital intensive, right? You pay as you go. And then additionally, you can reduce waste by having things be appropriately sized and being flexible in the way that they're sized. So those two things contribute to the cost effectiveness of the platform.
And there's also, just to add on to that, there's the ability within AWS to, it's one specific tool, but auto scaling in regards to like having a high traffic website, you're able to set an auto scaling group that allows you to provision the exact amount of servers that you need to meet a certain capacity. So, and this could like fluctuate throughout the day, like it's real time. So let's say around noon, you have spikes of traffic and you require more servers, but then at midnight, you don't require as much processing power to handle the traffic. It can fluctuate throughout the day, turn off and on servers as needed, and save you a bunch of money in the meantime, rather than having to have those servers run constantly throughout the day.
Yeah, I think the best example that we use when we ask if you have spikes in traffic is Black Friday. If you're an e-commerce shop and you're doing deals or you're sending out advertising and expecting an influx of traffic, you can pre-set up those guidelines so that it can scale, but you're still not spending money until you need to, correct?
Exactly.
Awesome. And let's talk about reliability and security. I know there's a number of security features that make it really easy to use. And then, reliability, when I remember the pre-AWS days and how often things went down. And then the post-AWS days when very rarely is AWS the issue with a site that's down. Talk about the security and reliability and how it makes it easy to manage.
Yeah, I mean, from the reliability standpoint, I kind of think that it speaks for itself. It is Amazon. And I don't have numbers, but a large portion of the web runs on AWS or a similar cloud provider. And when it goes down, which it does, it's is a massive deal. And it's because of that, it's rare. It very rarely goes down. I can't recall the last time that I remember a major outage at AWS.
Yeah, I think one of the great things as we talk to our clients is if that happens, you go, AWS is on it, and also half of the internet is down. So nobody thinks that everybody's aware that it's not your issue and that it will get resolved. And you have this oh, we're in this together, go to apple.com. That's also down.
Right.
Or whatever, knowing, and then knowing that the powers that be are, trying to prevent that. And then, on it 24/7, 365 with probably many hundreds of people trying to solve the problem when there's an issue. The one thing I've wanted to talk about in terms of security is when we get into talking to clients about specific security requirements, I'm just going to throw some terms out there and hopefully it doesn't throw you for a loop, but PCI and SOC 2 compliance. And I hear our team saying, oh yeah, if we're hosting that on Amazon, it's easier to make sure that we're meeting those specific requirements. Is there something to that comment, or is there still a lot of work that you need to do? Ben.
Okay, so Tim's definitely a security expert. Tim, jump in if you want to. I would say that AWS provides an environment in which they control certain aspects like the networking and the hardware side of things, but they also require, it's called the shared responsibility model, but they require the users, us in this case, to also enforce those standards. So I think it depends on the specifics. I think AWS is compliant on certain things, but then there's also requirements for us to be compliant with those and how we use it.
Sure.
So like Ben's alluding to, it's a combination of you start from a place that is compliant, but you're putting your configuration on top of that, which also has to be compliant. But starting from a solid foundation is a really important part.
Great. All right, here we go. All right, so here's what Joe was waiting for. Ben was gracious enough to take a screenshot of what he logs into on what does AWS look like specifically to our dashboard. And so my questions to you, Ben, are what do you most typically work with within the dashboard? And then talk a little bit about our instances as well.
Yeah, so primarily I do deal with the instances. As you can see at this the screenshot that I took, there was 95 running instances. And, once we actually...
And an instance is analogous to a server.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So I can kind of explain the primary terms of what we're seeing on this page. So yeah, an instance is a virtual server. Technically speaking, there can be multiple instances on the hardware that AWS provides, but they're all separated, and we can essentially just reserve, part of a server that we need to use. And other people can use other parts of that server. So yeah, we're reserving 95 different sized instances in this scenario, virtual servers. The volumes, which you can see at kind of the bottom of that resources list, those equate to essentially hard drives that are attached to servers. In certain situations, you can attach multiple of these drives to the same server, and they also provide tools to dynamically resize these volumes. So if your server starts running out of space, you can just expand it, and in a lot of scenarios, it just works automatically, which is great. Or there's scenarios where you're paying too much for storage, you kind of want to cut it down. The server isn't using all of it, and you can just shrink it. And then snapshots over on the right side, DATs, those are essentially just point-in-time backups of the volumes and of the instances so that we can use to restore a website or a server to a specific point in time and retain all of the data. Super useful. Always keep backups, of course.
Yeah, I think as I was learning from you and preparing for this, that snapshots are almost a backup to the backups, correct? Meaning that like there are often other procedures that you can go through to to get a site back to an hour ago or 2 hours ago. But if that fails, you can go back to 3 days ago, and it will, I'm assuming, almost always work as a snapshot backup.
Yeah, so restoring to a snapshot or a backup, in this case, can take a little bit of time. So it's sort of like a worst case scenario, you could say. Ideally, if a developer is or a client is doing work on a site, ideally we just do the opposite of what they did to break it. If a developer does like updates to a site and they break, then we can revert those updates a lot easier than reverting to a full snapshot of the server. So yes, they are kind of worst case scenarios, backups of, yeah.
But my guess is those help you sleep at night.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. And then I think this is probably, I don't want to get into too many of the pieces on the left-hand side, but I see a big orange button called Launch Instance. I'm assuming that obviously that would, if you hit that button, you'd be setting up a server for a new web app or site, and you'd do some configuration, and then we'd see instances running as 96, correct?
Yeah, so that would, that would start you through the process of setting up a server, which of course there's a million configuration options. One additional thing to note is that with the images or the AMIs that you can see on the left-hand column, we can actually create like kind of a snapshot of an instance in a certain point of time. And we can use that as a starting point to quicker create these instances and get them turned into actual like public websites faster.
Cool. Great. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is just kind of the overview. I do want to stop though, because we had a question that I intended to speak about before we got to this point. So I'm going to ask it now. How do you compare AWS to the other major hosting providers? So there are specialist hosting providers, as I think of. So an example of a specialty hosting provider would be WP Engine. They're really great at hosting WordPress sites, hence the WP. Then you get into these, maybe more of an AWS competitor in the Google Cloud Platform and also Azure. Like, do either of you have an overview of how they're different, how they're similar, and what their impact is on each other?
Yeah, so there's a lot of overlap. When you get to these cloud hosting providers, a lot of them are like, for most people's use cases, you could go with any cloud hosting provider you want. You could do a cost analysis and just see which one's the cheapest for your use case. But there's also, GCP, owned by Google or created by Google, they may have some benefits of interacting with certain Google products. Azure, owned by Microsoft, of course, they make Windows, so I believe Windows servers are a little bit cheaper on Azure. So there's kind of, generally speaking, they're very similar, but there's some intricacies with each of them and how they work. That makes them a little bit different, and that changes their cost, their pricing point.
And we benefit. And at least, Tim, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We benefit by, we could maybe save $10 a month on a medium-sized Azure server if we did all of our Windows hosting there. But if we do everything in one platform, we probably get a volume discount of some sort, but also Ben only has to work in one platform. And I assume that the time savings and the familiarity and the know where to go and not learning two different systems, it's kind of like having a Mac and a PC sitting right next to each other. If you can do everything on one of them, you're more efficient. Is it that kind of a piece?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. additionally, one of the reasons that we've stuck with AWS, it wasn't necessarily why we chose it initially, but one of the reasons we've stuck with it is they've continued their pace of innovation. It's, they're going at an incredible clip where they're adding services, they're trying things, they're, I see them as a leader in the offerings that they have, and I see that it's going to continue that way. So while it is true that for your basic things, the cloud, which cloud you choose is maybe less important. I think once you get into more advanced things, I see AWS as the obvious choice.
Got it. Great. Thanks. Moving on, Ben, another screenshot we grabbed was kind of the uptime monitoring and status page. And I know that when there's an issue or you get an alert, you come here. Do you want to just give a high level overview of what you can do and kind of what you look for or what you deal with?
Yeah, sure. So this is CloudWatch. This is how we can essentially create alarms, and we can monitor specific server metrics, and we can create thresholds for those metrics, and then we can create actions for when they exceed those thresholds. So, for example, we can monitor the CPU usage of a server, and if the average CPU utilization of a server exceeds 90% for longer than a minute, we can send like a Slack alert or an email or a text message to specific contacts so that we know there's something going on with this instance and we need to look into it. And from there, we can dig deeper into the actual server and kind of troubleshoot and figure out what's going on and resolve it long term. But yeah, so this, like specifically this screenshot provides an overview of, like, as you can see, we have 42 alarms in the OK status. They're all green. There's no red on this page, which is a good thing.
Got it. Yeah.
And what is an example of a situation where it turns red? What causes CPU to peak over 90?
Certain situations we can have like a DDoS attack, for example. If we have a bunch of different bots on the net trying to hit a specific website to overload it, to cause it to go down. If we see the CPU, maxing out for a little bit of time, we can go look at the network requests and kind of see like who's visiting this website and like what are they trying to do on this website, or if they're just fake requests essentially.
Yeah. Now, what would you do? I guess it depends on what's going on, but
yeah, it definitely depends on what's going on in the situation that I described with like a DDoS attack. If it's actually a DDoS attack and like the requests are coming from hundreds of different IP addresses, we would have to look into a different solution where we have a web application firewall that would filter out those requests. But if it's a situation where like just a single bot is trying to take down a site, it's usually a super simple fix. We can just ban a single IP address and preventing it from accessing the website and preventing those requests from being called in the first place.
And as a novice, sometimes internal issues can cause this as well. So for example, if you're paying a service provider to crawl your website and index it, sometimes you can pick up that it's like an intended bot, but maybe you're doing it at 5 p.m. when your traffic is also high, and maybe you should move that intended crawler to 1 a.m. or that not to crawl every day or something like that. So once in a while, it's maybe not even malicious. I've seen it, happen in the past. And so you can figure out if it's something that's supposed to happen and make sure that it's just a little easier on the server.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's happened many, many times. And right. And so just knowing even when these things are scheduled, and if the client's okay with like, okay, my site's going to run a little bit slow for 15 minutes while this crawl runs.
Yep.
Essentially.
Awesome. I want to make sure we get to kind of like features and trends. And I found this screenshot on the AWS site of all the crazy things that they're doing. And I think this alludes to Tim's like forward-looking platform and all of the different things that they're doing. I know we don't touch all of these, and I'm sure that very few people or groups touch all of them. But of all these things, Ben, what are we using out of these things, and maybe something that you're like looking forward to trying someday when we have a project or an opportunity or in your free time to explore?
Yeah, so on the left column, of course, we use compute. That's where all the servers live. We also deal with security, identity, and compliance. It's for kind of managing how our developers utilize AWS. We host our databases on the database service, which is called RDS. And then right there in the middle, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but the cost management is a way to manage your costs in AWS, kind of track down costs and figure out what's costing you the most and giving you options to reduce those costs. And I guess one other call out, bottom right, storage. There's a lot of different storage options on AWS, and we utilize their different storage options in different ways, whether it be long-term, short-term storage, or what have you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, of course, there's a bunch on here that are a little crazier. Satellite.
Yep.
I think that's a more recent one, but you can pay to essentially reserve, I don't remember correctly, but you can pay to reserve like satellite images or utilizing a satellite to, do whatever you need to do. But that one's a little crazy. Robotics. I'm actually not sure what AWS provides regarding robotics, but another jumps out at you.
Yep, and machine learning, VR, AR, when you're doing those sorts of things, there are some specialty setup pieces that allow you to do that a little bit easier. And I think at the same time that as we talked about this storage thing being, a huge database or whatever it is, storing files. And it comes back to this story that we talk about with, this is such a forward-looking platform, but somewhere we ran along the lines of how they actually transfer a huge amount of data. And Ben, will you tell me, we've talked about it, so tell folks like how it's like reverse thinking, but it's kind of an interesting solution when you get into migrating large amounts of data and what they do.
Right. So situation comes where you have insane amount of data in a data center somewhere, and you need to transfer it somewhere else. And the first thought is, oh, we'll just transfer it using the internet. Turns out that's going to take years, decades potentially, to actually transfer all that data using standard internet speeds from today. So AWS comes up with a service where they will send you a semi-truck to your data center, and they will plug in to your servers, and you can transfer the files onto the semi-truck. They will take it wherever you need to go, and then upload it on the other end. But yeah, we were talking about like the reverse thinking, just using an actual, like physically transferring the data rather than sending it over cables is just insane.
Yeah, I just find that like amazing that the more manual process is better than the superpowers, computing powers and internet it being, how much data is out there when you think of how fast you can download a video file or whatever. Even homes have gigabyte service, and think about it, and imagine they could get a faster line than that into a large data center, but it still doesn't beat hiring a driver and a truck to go grab the physical servers and drive it somewhere else and put it in that way. It just is like a fascinating thing that kind of gets you going back to, oh yeah, sometimes the old way is the easy way in doing that. So before we get to Q&A, Tim and Ben, any other thoughts about what people should know when they're starting up with AWS, or how to compare it to other, the GoDaddies of the world, and how different it is? Any other final thoughts?
I would just say that there's a lot of good training resources out there. The accreditations and certifications that AWS provides themselves are really good resources for understanding AWS before you really dig into it. I would say, I think having that fundamental knowledge is really powerful before you put in your credit card information and start racking up a bill.
There you go. And yeah, or maybe just doing that will make sure that whatever server you get is the right size and the right cost for you, and not just, oh, well, it's this amount or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's great to go and get some training and understand the system. How important do you feel like it is? Like, Ben, this is your full-time job, is to migrate sites, deal with CPU, high CPU, I'm sure among many other things. But what would it take for somebody to become, like, what amount of time would they have to spend of their average day to really be, familiar with it enough to kind of go, hey, I'm going to manage 5 or 10 sites on this? Like,
I think there's two sides of it. I think
Sure.
one is understanding, take the cloud side out of it, but understanding how websites work and how you actually host a website in the first place, whether that be on your computer or on a server. And then there's the understanding the cloud infrastructure side of things. I feel like it's difficult to put, numbers on that, but I do think there are a lot of good resources out there for starting to work on, the systems administration side of things.
Got it. So if I'm a web developer and I've got to host it somewhere, getting involved with AWS, while it has all these crazy capabilities, it's still something, if you understand the general pieces of hosting, they can make it simple enough for those users as well.
Yeah, and that being said, there are also, depending on how you create your application, there are also tools that AWS provides to kind of cut the middleman out. For example, like Elastic Beanstalk or Amplify are services that AWS provides to like host a Node application. If you wrote a Node application and you want to host it somewhere, AWS has those tools to, you don't actually have to set up a server. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
Exactly. If you're doing a basic website, Lightsail is an obvious choice. It's how do you get onto the platform quickly and easily. One thing I wanted to just do a callback to from something Ben was saying earlier was what's called the shared responsibility model. So this is a key part of if you're considering AWS as an option. The idea is that they are crystal clear about the things that they do and the things that they don't do. And the things that they don't do include managing the operating system. They do manage the hardware, they don't manage the operating system, except in certain circumstances. In general, they don't. But the point of this is to be aware, if you're considering AWS, you got to be aware of what you're getting yourself into, and just make sure that it fits with what your needs actually are. It could be that you need a partner to come in and help with what would be your side of the shared responsibility model. It all kind of depends on what your capabilities are and on what your needs are.
I guess, can I think of a novice or my level of thought and apply it to something? So something that we do often is say that a client might need a service to be, I'll use SOC 2 because I know you both are familiar with that. SOC 2 compliance is some specific security requirement. And basically, you can go out there and Amazon says it's SOC 2 compliant. But that doesn't mean that just because you put your files on their SOC 2 compliant server, that your site is SOC 2 compliant.
Right. It would be pretty easy to make it un-SOC 2 compliant, which is what you're alluding to.
Yes. So we still have to do our shared responsibility of the file-based work or the code-based work that we're doing, but it's sitting on top of something that we ultimately know will mirror up. If we do our part, they're going to do their part.
Right.
Yeah. So just so people out there know, just because you put your files on a SOC 2 compliant server doesn't mean it's SOC, and that applies to likely a lot of things. I'm thinking HIPAA, PCI, lots of other compliance things, which leads me into a question from the feed. And thank you. If anybody else has other questions, we've got a few more minutes. Would love more questions if there are any out there. But somebody asked, does AWS make it easier to address accessibility or WCAG? And is accessibility a focus of Fjorge? So Ben, I am not aware of anything that AWS does for WCAG compliance. Is that anything that you've heard of?
I guess it depends if it's from like a development standpoint or from a hosting standpoint. I'm not familiar. I know like the way I can think that it may address and make it easier is if you're using essentially like a code build pipeline for delivering your application, you can utilize additional tools to essentially like audit your application as it's being built to see if it's, passes this accessibility guideline.
Yep. Great. Okay. Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead, Tim.
I think in general, though, the point is any accessibility needs or features are going to typically be at the application level, which would be in the shared responsibility model, the developer's responsibility or the administrator's responsibility.
And I'm going to ask the second part of this question, and is accessibility a focus for Fjorge? Absolutely. And it's good story time because I think it alludes to two things that we talked about on this. One, the way that we got into accessibility was 5-6 years ago, Tim. We got a call from a company in Minnesota called Site Improve. And they happen to be making a tool that crawls your site to make sure it's accessible. And they said, hey, can you build us a website? And we said, sure. And they said, it needs to meet these WCAG requirements. And I said, what's that? And we looked it up and we told them we weren't familiar with that process. And they said, don't worry about it. We'll teach you everything you need to know. And so we built their site with much fear of what it could mean down the road. And they taught us a ton. We learned a lot, and we have parlayed that into quite an expertise in WCAG world. We kind of got in early. We also had a lead referral source from them. They'll send us people who need help remediating sites or building sites that are compliant. And then this leads into my story earlier about how tools can cause your site to have an issue. So their crawler goes out and crawls your website, and it can put CPU load on it at a certain period of time. Now, most of theirs default to overnight, and it's only once a week, but it is one of those tools that could be an intended thing that will create an audited result that could cause a problem for Ben. And I'm sure Ben, when he has repeated problems at the exact same time of night, he's going, okay, what are you guys running? It could be a screaming frog. It could be an SEO tool like that. It could be one of these WCAG scanners. I'm sure that's exactly what goes into his mind if he sees it repeatedly at the same time. So absolutely, Fjorge is, as I know, at least in the region, a leader in accessibility. But it isn't really something that Amazon itself hosting is going to get you much of a leg up, since it's mostly, as Tim mentioned, at the application level. All right, one more question. When describing AWS offerings to non-technical stakeholders, what concepts do you use? For example, their services are like utilities or Lego blocks, etc. Yeah, Ben, when I'm talking about building an application, I use the home analogy. Is there any analogy that you use, or Tim?
I'll say that there are not many situations in which I have to explain it's like AWS concepts to non-technical stakeholders. So Tim, if you have any examples.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I would say, comparing it to the physical world is one thing. So a lot of people understand what a server is. Some people don't. But how does whatever you're doing in the cloud compare to what you used to do in the physical world is one kind of way to talk about it. I think, you know, if you're talking about capacity, you could talk about like maybe a freeway or something like that. If you're talking about, you know, freeways have different lanes that you can go through and different speeds that you can go through. So it can relate there. I think a lot of times for me, it's just as I'm talking about something specific, it'll come to me that it's like something else in the world.
One example that like I use for hosting and managing software on any of these platforms in general is a car in a parking lot. So number one, you can drive it to different parking lots. Number two, like not all parking lots are equal. You may think that they are, but there are ones that there is no walls, there's no gate, there's no security guard. And there are ones that are enclosed, locked, monitored 24/7. And, you know, a part of that security guard is Ben. You know, if you just aren't utilizing somebody that you can talk to, you're relying on a parking lot attendee that isn't really a security guard. And so while your site seems like it's this thing that nothing hits it, it's driving down the road, it's getting bumped by it's getting a door ding from the car next to it, it's getting, you know, and it's getting rained on if it's outside, it's getting snowed on. All of those things are really happening in this world, and it's not as simple as like set it and forget it as some people think in the simplest terms. And there are all these different levels of security from the platform, so that being the building, and then the security from the person being the security guard, or Ben in this case, making sure that everything is set. But at the same time, you can have a door, a lock, a security guard. That doesn't mean that your car can't get broken into. But you need to have somebody have those backups. You need to have a different car, or you need to have something else. And I think that's an analogy that we use, or at least I do, from a high level hosting point of view, but it doesn't necessarily apply to just Amazon. All right. Being respectful of time, we are going to end the webinar now. I did not talk to Dee about this, but typically we post these or share these as well. So if anybody wants access to this and we're not sharing it in the near future, I do believe we've been recording it.
I'm going to send an email out to everybody that registered, so you'll have a recording of it.
Got it. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us here at Fjorge, or visit us at fjorgedigital.com. Sorry, I forgot to change to the Q&A session there. My bad. But thanks, Ben and Tim. I really appreciate you doing this and sharing this with me, the rest of the Fjorge team, and giving us anybody on the call an insight into what you do and how we utilize AWS.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.